I'd say get in slowly, and I would possibly look at where I finished up, which was take him in the spring of the year and let him go back to the dairy farmer in the back end of the year. Let him keep him for the winter, because that's the period in the system where you have the most cost. And that if you're on top of your game and you're growing grass well, that's the cheapest time you'll keep those cattle. The cost with any of these, with this system, is making silage, feeding nuts, handling slurry, all the work in the yard. That's where the cost is.
Hello and welcome to the Beef Edge, the Teagasc Beef Podcast, for all your latest news, information and advice for Irish beef farmers. I'm Catherine Egan and I'm joined by Kilkenny farmer Liam Cassin to discuss his contract heifer rearing system. Liam, you're very welcome. Before we start, can you give a background to your farm and your farming system?
I'm probably contract rearing for the last 14, maybe 15 years at this stage. And before that, I was all sheep farming here back maybe close on 20, 25 years ago, and I got cleaned out with scrapie. Then I had to stay out of sheep production for a number of years. I went into suckling, eventually back into a bit of sheep again. And the sucklers basically weren't working out for me. And kind of by accident, I kind of fell into contract rearing about 2010 or thereabouts. And I've been contract rearing. I started off some sucklers and contract rearing, and eventually I reduced the suckler herd that I had. I had it built up maybe to close on 30 cows at the time, reduced the suckler herd, and I went all contract rearing.
And why did you consider contract rearing as a system for your farm?
Financial, more so than anything else, was the first thing. It was the only system I could get into where I didn't have to put a big outlay of money. I could get into stock straight away without having to go to the bank looking for money or to use some of my own money to get into it. And the other side for me was, if I started on the 1st of the month, let's just say you started on the 1st of January. If I took stock in the 1st of January, 1st of February, I was getting money back from those stock. So I was kind of paid nearly within a month of the stock being landed on the farm. I was starting to receive a payment for those cattle. And
you've kind of touched on it there, Liam. Can you discuss how the system works on your farm, from once the heifers come, their weight, their age, and then how you manage them throughout the year until they're returned back to the farmer again?
I initially started off, the first batch of cattle that I took here were calves. And back, we'll say it was 14 years ago. I'm not exactly sure when, but it was an ad in the Farmer's Journal. There was no one doing contract rearing. There was an odd article appeared in the Teagasc magazine there that comes out every quarter or whenever it comes out. And there was an article about contract rearing in it. So one day I saw an ad in the back of a Farmer's Journal for a man that was looking for someone to contract rear, and I phoned him, and he happened to be from Gort in County Galway. Now, Gort in Galway to me is 93 miles, and made the initial phone call. Nothing happened for a couple of months, and then he phoned me back and we had a meeting, and I started. It was the middle of the summer we actually started, and it was I think around the 1st of July. I took a batch of calves off that man, and I started in with calves. So I had calves the first year. I kept them, they were outwintered actually. The first year I had no sheds. I don't have any sheds on the farm. I should have said that earlier on. I have about 30 to 31 hectares here, no sheds on it at all. It's all grass. And I outwintered the cattle the first year, got on okay with them, outwintered. He was happy enough. The weights, we got to the weights, the desired weights and that. And after the first winter, they went from not to 1s to 1 to 2s, bulled them the second year, and took in his calves the second year. So the second year I was at it, I actually had 2 batches of stock from that man. And they would go back then the following October as in-calf heifers.
That's great, Liam. How is it working now at the moment on the system now, 14 years on?
14 years on, I've done everything in between. I was taking in reared calves, and then I decided, God, maybe I could do these calves better than this man could do, and I reared the calves. And I expanded the system. I started with one man, and last year I was contract rearing for 4 different dairy farmers on the farm, with 4 different groups of cattle going around on 4 separate blocks within my farm of land. So basically my farm here is have 10 fields. There's 30 and a half hectares. I have, if I want to, I can have 60 paddocks. I have 30 paddocks, but I can divide each paddock in half and make it 60 paddocks. 2 hours would divide the whole place into 60 paddocks for me if I need to. And what I basically do is I allocate a certain number of paddocks to each batch of cattle, and they stay within that group of paddocks. So they might have 10 or 12 or 14 paddocks, depending on the size of the numbers that I'd have. And I've tried rearing calves from 2 weeks of age, taking them right the way through and giving them back as in-calf heifers. And I've kind of tweaked the system. I've kind of settled now this year. I'm not keeping any stock for the winter, and I'm just doing what I'm calling it a glorified summer grazing system, where I'm taking in stock probably January, February, depending on ground conditions. I have a real dry farm. That's one thing I will say. I have not 1 acre, we'll say, of wet land or anything like that, but a dry summer I will burn, but a normal year I can get stock out quite early. So the plan going forward from now on is take in the stock as early as I can the spring of the year, graze them for the summer, and they go back the back end of the year to the farmer, and the dairy farmer, and he'll keep them for the winter, and the calves will come back to me the following spring, and the in-calf heifers will stay with the dairy farmer and go into the dairy herd.
And you touched on the paddock system you have there, Liam. Like, managing grass at the key times during the year is key to your system to maximise the financial gain. Can you just talk through how you're managing getting them into the ideal covers on the paddock system that you're doing?
Basically, I started the first thing when I got involved in the system was I had a weighing scale. So for the first couple of years, we weighed heifers here, kind of, I won't say religiously, but we weighed them a couple of times a year and that. But after a couple of years, and after the guys got used to me, they'd never ask me to weigh them. And they might come a couple of times a year. I might see my man from Galway, I might see him 3 times in the year. And that he'd come down for a spin. He might ring me. He could be an hour away from my house, and he'd ring me to say he was on the way down. He knew where his cattle were and that. But as regards managing grass, the dairy farmer kind of likes to see on top of the grass end of it that they like to see you using paddocks. All the better if you're grass measuring. I got involved with a dairy group purely because I wanted to grass measure, and that it wasn't until I started doing that when I had low stock numbers here, it was no problem manage it. I could divide a field in half and give them half a field, but I really wasn't on top of the grass. And I got involved with a grass group a couple of years ago with a couple of I was the only contract rearer in the dairy group and we were all measuring grass, and it was purely a grass group, and it was absolutely brilliant. I made my paddock smaller. I was able to divide them up, have the water trough set up the way I have, and most of my paddocks now are maybe anything from 3/4 of an acre to maybe to 1.25 acres. 1.5 acres would be a big paddock here with me, to be honest with you, and it's literally just move them on a regular basis. Once the paddock is grazed out, move them on and keep moving them on a rotational system around the farm.
And you mentioned there you have 4 different groups of contract heifers in, contract rearing them, and every contract, I suppose, is different from what you mentioned. How do you decide who pays for the different costs that arrive during the year?
I used to try to keep it simple, and and I have friends contract reared, and some people, the dairy farmer looks after the veterinary. Me, I just said to the lads, listen, I'll take a gamble. I look after the veterinary costs on the farm. If an animal gets sick on my farm, I look after it. And really it was to give the dairy farmer the how will I put it, the confidence that I was actually looking after him. Because if it comes back on me, okay, I could be contract rearing for a guy in Galway, we'll say, for argument. He has no guarantee that I'm looking at those cattle every day. And if I decide, listen, I'll go away for 5 or 6 days, or have nobody to look at him, or I don't check him, and you come back after the 5 or 6 days and something is sick, it's a cost on me. Whereas if I'm responsible for it, I'll make sure somebody is looking at those cattle every day and they're being checked every day, and that. Now, I know other guys that are contract reared, the dairy farmer is responsible for any veterinary bills on the farm, with the animals. But just with me, once they come onto my farm, I'm solely responsible for everything that happens on my farm after that. And that's just the system I work. Different lads work different systems.
And in relation to dosing products or vaccines and concentrates during the year?
The concentrates, same story, up to me. And that now I have it built into my expenses, or what I charge for the system. And the same with the silage and all that. When I was keeping them for the winter, it was up to me to make the best quality silage I could make. And the better the quality of silage I could make, the less meals I had to feed. The less meals I had to feed, the less it was costing me. And that, so if I decided I was going to, if I made bad silage and I ended up having to feed 2.5, 3 kilos meals to the heifers, that came out of my pocket. But if I made good silage and I could get away with no meal or very little meal, that was a saving on me. But I had the meals built in, I had a price built in for the meals. But the better I could make my silage, the less meals I had to feed to the cattle. And that's just the way I did it here. Vaccines, the way I work the vaccines here is the vaccines are the dairy farmer's problem. He supplies the vaccines, I'll give him, or he can come to my farm and we'll both give him, or if he wants to come and he give them himself, that's okay, I don't have a problem with it. But usually he supplies me with the vaccines and I give them myself.
And for all of those farmers, I suppose the key thing is you have relationships with all those farmers and you have an agreement in place as to who's responsible for each of the things you've outlined.
At the moment I have 4 farmers. I have an agreement with 1 farmer and the rest of it is word of mouth, gentleman's agreement. I get on well with all the guys that I'm contract rearing for, and I look after the cattle that I have as if they were my own, we'll say, for argument's sake. To date, I haven't had a problem with any farmer. And
it's great that it's working your situation, as
perfect.
You say,
That mightn't be for everybody. That may not be for everybody, and I do know cases where things went wrong and things got into disputes and people had to take cattle out of farms and things like that and that. But just for me, this is the way it has gone so far. I don't have a set date that the cattle leave the farm. It depends on grass growth. So that could be the 1st of November, the 15th of November, it could be the 31st of October. It's just whenever I run out of grass or I feel I haven't enough grass to keep the cattle going.
That's great. And I suppose from the experience you have over the last 14 years, Liam, in the system of contract rearing heifers, what advice have you for any farmer that might be considering going into contract rearing?
I'd say get in slowly. And I would possibly look at where I finished up, which was take him in the spring of the year and let him go back to the dairy farmer in the back end of the year. Let him keep him for the winter. And that, because that's the period in the system where you have the most cost. And that if you're on top of your game and you're growing grass well, that's the cheapest time you'll keep those cattle. The cost with with this system is making silage, feeding nuts, handling slurry, all the work in the yard. That's where the cost is. And that and I'd say maybe start with one. No, I'm not saying it's for everybody to have 4 different dairy farmers on their farm land, because it is a hell of a lot of work when you go move cattle. And that if I'm going away for a day, I have 4 groups of cattle to move. It's 4 of everything, where it would be brilliant if I had just one farmer, but just the way my system is and my farm is, it suits me better with smaller groups of cattle going around the place.
That's great, Liam. Thanks very much. And for anyone considering contract rearing as an option for their farm, further information is available on the Teagasc website, and I'll include the link in the podcast text. Thanks very much, Liam.
No problem at all, Catherine. Thank you.
You can catch up on all other shows and interviews from the Beef Edge podcast on the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie, or you can listen on Apple and Google Podcasts as well as Spotify. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe so you never miss a show. For all other updates from our beef programme, keep an eye on our Twitter and Facebook pages. Until next time, I'm Catherine Egan and thanks for listening.